Um, this is our Patternfly community meeting for March 24th, 2020. Thank you for joining. We'll go ahead and get right into it. So our topics for today is we'll go over some new features and enhancements. We're going to go over a couple of highlights for our upcoming major release, and then talk about some Patternfly content enhancements, including some website homepage improvements we're going to be making to the content. And then Gina's going to get into updates to our PF Styles information she's been working on, and Lucy is going to cover the drop shadow and spacing reduction we've been working on for Patternfly. Last, I'll cover what we're working on next, and at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A. So keep those questions in mind, and we'll definitely have time today to answer those at the end of the meeting. All right. So first, for new features and enhancements, Tatiana's going to cover card and chip group. Stop sharing.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
For this past milestone, the feature for adding styles to the card, so you can show when it's selectable and when it's selected, was added. So in this example, you can see when you hover over the card that the styling changes, which indicates that it's selectable. Then if you go ahead and click it, then the style will change to show that it's selected. So 2 new pops were added that is selectable, which changes it to the styling you see here, and is selected. See this styling here. So that was that for the card. And for chip groups, we added the tooltip to the chip group label. So then when it overflows this chip, you can hover over the chip, and then you'll see the label, full label, in the tooltip. And that's it. Oh, sorry, that's it. That was there already. It was the feature to add the overflow to the chip group label. So this chip group label is long, so it overflows and is hidden. So if I hover over it now that we have a tooltip that shows the whole label. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Satani. And Katie's going to cover data list, modal, and select enhancements.
All right. Hello, everyone. This one. All right. And everyone see my screen?
We can.
Perfect. The first step, we have a new feature for data list. This is the compact variation. This is a new flag for data list. So you can see up at the top, the basic example we have here. It's a lot of padding between all of the rows and columns, whereas compact minimizes that for a bit more of a smaller data list. And that is achieved with a new is compact flag, which is right here. So you can add that into any data list variant, doesn't matter. So that covers the new data list feature. Next up, we have a new thing for modal. So the new feature for modal is a new description property. And then this is basically used as a subheader, like a paragraph below the header that's apart from the body. So you can see it right here, which is just a description, compared to the basic modal, which just has the body. So it gives you a bit more definition if we want to describe something underneath the header. This property is a new string or a new, you can use a React node here as well. This example uses just a simple string though. And then lastly, we have a new feature for select, which is an inline filter. The example here is with checkbox. So you see you pull down the menu and you have all of your checkboxes, but you also now have a new filtering function that you can use similar to type ahead with run, and then you can back out, and then it persists. So this one is achieved with a new flag called has inline filter, which just tells the select that it needs to render a unique input object inside the list. And you also use the custom filtering to just tell the select how to filter, basically, because it's not built in unlike type ahead, so you need to give it an on filter function. If you get no results, it actually is a built-in customizable string for that, using the same no results flag as the type ahead select. And I think that's it.
Great, thanks, Katie. All right, and Mike's going to share file upload.
All right, so let me just share my screen here. Let me know when you guys can see my screen.
We can see it.
All right, so this sprint I worked on a file upload component for the React component library here, and it is pretty flexible. The primary use case for it was a basic text file, but as I'll get into later, it can be customized for any kind of file or whatever the consuming application would need. But the basic use case here is that we can either browse for or drag and drop a text file, and it will populate into the field and show the file name and become read-only by default. So this might be a use case where you'd need to specify an SSH public key or something like that. The default behavior of becoming read-only is to prevent people from accidentally editing the file before they submit the form. You can override that with a prop that allows edits after the drop. So if I needed to, for example, drop a CSV and then make a change to it, I can do that. It also has a clear button, which is used in this case because it's read-only, if you need to start over, you can clear it. And there are also, because it uses the React Dropzone library internally, there's a prop exposed called Dropzone props that allows you to pass whatever custom props to that library that you need to do things like restricting the file size or file type. So this particular example will only allow a CSV file that is under 1 kilobyte. You can see if I try to drop an image on it, it will show a validation error. Or if I tried to drop a really large CSV, it would do the same thing. And I mentioned earlier that it is customizable. So this default text area that can show below can be hidden. So if I had an application that needed to handle images, right now the component doesn't natively handle images, but you can render a custom preview instead of this text area, or just not have a preview at all. So in this case, the preview is disabled and I could just drop this image. And the image file would be handed off to the consuming application, and they could use whatever APIs they need to do to read that file. Up here, by default, it actually takes the whole file and reads it in as a string, and then passes that string in an on-change handler like any other text field in a form would. But in this form, it doesn't read the file directly, so you can handle very large files this way. It just hands the browser's file API, capital F file object, back to the application, and the application can do whatever it needs to do with that. Whether it's reading it directly with some other API, or if it's attaching it to a form data object to submit it, it's up to the consumer there. So that's with no preview at all. You can also have a custom preview, so I can show the same thing. If I drop a file here, I can render whatever I need to here from the consuming app, in this case just a little preview of the size and the file name. But if you're handling an image upload, for example, you could show a thumbnail here, or if you are doing a little bit of processing, you could show some processed results here, whatever you need to show after uploading the file. And of course, I didn't demonstrate the browse button. It works the same way. It'll just open the native browse dialog here, and it will do the same thing. That is all using the built-in kind of higher level abstract file upload. Inside the file upload component, it also it provides this stateful behavior, but it'll also render a stateless file upload field, which is just the presentational parts of it. It won't handle the browse or the drag and drop. But if you need to, for some reason, provide your own file browse, maybe you're browsing from some network location in a cluster in the application or something complex like that, where you don't want this default behavior that I've been demonstrating, you can just use our presentational layer here, and you can render whatever you need to. It makes you, you're responsible for rendering the state and keeping track of, if it's loading, if the drag is active, if the children are showing, and what the contents are and everything. But that's just, I'm exposing that inner piece if you need to use it as just a presentational layer there as well. So it's very customizable here. Even though it's just built with this text file use case in mind, it could be used for any manner of things. And then I think in the future, the idea is to, without any breaking changes, we could add support for, say, a zip file or an image, and it would just there would be more built-in preview options available if we need that. And I think that is about it. If you read the documentation here, I go into a little bit more detail about how to use it and what the props are like and that kind of thing. But just to show kind of the basic case in this high-level version, it's a very simple, just kind of one component with value and on change, just like any other form field would be for text. And then there's callbacks for when the read is started and finished, if it's a large file, so that it can show the loading spinner, which I don't think, I think it's loading fast enough that you can't really see it, but there is a loading spinner state in here. And then, so most of these examples look like that same kind of simple markup, but you can see the custom one down here has a little bit more to it. So when you're customizing it, you have some more props available. I think that's it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. We've got a cool in the chat. I agree. Next, Joachim's going to cover PF snippet extension.
Yes, hi. So Dana and I, we created a Visual Studio Code extension called Patternfly Snippets. So if you have VS Code, you might be in luck. But the way to install it, first of all, is if you follow the slide deck there, you can click on this link. It navigates you to the Visual Studio Code Marketplace, and from there you can press the install button. Or of course, you can always open up Visual Studio Code, go to the extensions tab, and then if you just search for Patternfly, you will see our extension. Once you install it, what this extension does for you is it adds this side item here in your, it adds a new view container with the Patternfly icon. And when you click it, you can see two different views, one for core and one for React. So what happens now if you open up a new editor window, and I'm just going to change the language mode to Markdown just to demonstrate this right now for core. You can see that we have added the last release, which is the current one, 2020.03. So now if you can click into these components, you can see all of the components that exist in core, and layouts, and utilities, and demos. And when you drill into these, you can see we have some, for each of these components, we have example files. They're prefixed with EX. So if I click on this, it'll insert the HTML snippet with all the Patternfly classes and everything to it. And if you don't want the example, if you want individual pieces themselves, you can just click on any of them. So these are all the basically core snippets that exist. Also, if you hover over any of these categories, you can also see a link. So if you click on that, for example, if I click on this About Modelbox button right here, it'll navigate me to the patternfly.org website, and it'll go directly to that page. So if you want to view more documentation on that, so that's for all the components that we have here. And for React, we have the same thing. Let me actually change the language mode again to TypeScript React. Okay. So here we also have our components. We do support a couple more releases because when this extension first got created, it got created at this release time. So for core, this was just added yesterday, which is why we only have the last release, the current release. But for React, you can go back a couple of releases. So for example, if you go to the 2019.10 release, you can see back then we still had some experimental components. But obviously with the newer releases, those have been removed and moved into the components category. So you can see we've got like the drawer, the divider, those are all experimental. And of course, we have the new file upload component right here. So why don't I demonstrate that one since Mike just showed it to us. So if I click on file upload, you can see it inserts this snippet, and so the way this was parsed is it parsed all the available properties. So for each so it basically spits out every single property that exists and tells you whether they're optional or required. And it also provides inline comments of basically its documentation in code. If you don't like the comments, you can always so React supports some additional features here. You can disable the comments, and then the next time I go and insert that file upload snippet, it'll just insert it without the comments. And one more experimental feature that was added was you can also toggle the auto import. So now what happens is if I click this again, it'll also add that import statement for me at the top. Oops, right up here. And if I were to go and add another component, let's say data toolbar, it just appends it to the top. And just because it can be oh, and also we provide the same hover links, hover button, so you can go to the documentation directly if you want to. Another feature is that you can also use shortcuts. So by default, if you type in exclamation mark, then you can see all the snippets available to you from the completion window here. So you can just easily filter down. You know, if I want to find, let's see, footer, page footer, maybe. Oops. Footer. Okay. I guess there's no page footer, but I see several other footers, so I can just click that and it'll insert it for me. And the same for core, but now by default the trigger is add. Sorry, not here. Language mode to Markdown. If I type the add trigger, then it'll show me all the available core snippets and examples. And this is all configurable. So if you go to your settings and you scroll down to within the extensions settings, if you go down to Patternfly code, you can see that from here you can also switch to release if you want to, if you don't want to use this menu. You can also change the trigger use in your own settings here, and you can also toggle the auto import and whether you want to insert the inline comments. And also, if you mouse click on the fragments here, it'll insert it into any open editor window. But for now, if you want these completions, they're only supported in a subset of files, and that is also configurable here in the settings. So for example, to get the completions for React, that is supported like in TypeScript files, TypeScript React files, Markdown, and a couple more. And the core snippets are available to HTML and Markdown, but those file types are configurable also in the settings. So yeah, that's it. I hope it's useful to you guys.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joachim. That wraps us up for our new features and enhancements. And next, we're going to move into our topics for today. So first, Dana's going to kick us off with some updates or a little bit more information about our major release coming up this spring.
All right. Do you want me to show the slides, Rachel, or are you going to show them?
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Thank you.
You said you do want me to show my screen, or are you already showing? Can I lose my screen?
I'm happy to share it,
Okay.
but usually it's easier for prisoners to drive.
All right. I can show if I can find the button to show. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what Blue Jean's doing. Do you mind sharing, Rachel? Oh wait, here we go.
Yeah,
Give me
I
a sec.
will say that it's not just you. Blue Jeans has been a little finicky.
There we go.
Here we
Okay.
are.
Thank you. All right, sorry for that. So I think
Yeah,
everyone
no
hopefully
problem.
knows by now that we're in the middle of the beginning of working on a major release for Patternfly, which will include breaking changes. So just wanted to talk a little bit about what that looks like for testing and what to expect for our releases. So we are still having releases both from the current line that everyone's using and from the new pre-release line. So you can try out the new functionality as it comes. And there's a V4 branch on both Patternfly, which had been Patternfly Next, but now everything moved back home, and our Patternfly React repo. So that's where to look for the code, but there's also in the next section, you'll see that we have a pre-release V4 tag on NPM. So that's the way you would install those packages. You would just specify the app pre-release-v4, which is what's called a channel on NPM. So you can just get the latest by using that tag. And we really are hoping for teams to try these out as we go. We're going to be testing once per milestone. This breaking change work will take 3 of our milestones to be completed. So we plan on just testing once every 3 weeks at a little more depth to make sure that these products can be upgraded and we can see to make sure that these breaking changes that will be included can be dealt with effectively. So as we've been going, we've been keeping impact notes. And you know what? I should have shared, but let me show those briefly. How about I take presenting? I think I figured out how to do it. Rachel,
Okay,
just take
awesome.
it away
You
from me.
should be able to share it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what we're doing here is with each pull request, we're adding a breaking changes section if it's labeled with breaking changes, and that. The intent of that is to describe what changed as well as what developers should do in response to that change. You'll see if something was removed, this is the replacement prop, and we're hoping it's just to find and replace with a specific list. So this one shows a number of ARIA property changes along with which should be used in place of those. And if you're not using those, then you can just kind of continue on and not worry about these. And we're going to be rolling these up into a single breaking change note, which we plan on sending as a digest and also including at the very end of this process, which will include the PR title as well as those breaking change notes extracted. So we have a single basically like a digest out of all of the things that were merged. So a developer will have a reference sheet to know how to work through the changes in the release. And this is meant so that you don't have to click through every issue or every PR and try to figure out what the impact is when you run and use the newer versions of Patternfly. Because sometimes these things won't necessarily break a build, but you'll have a visual change. So you'll want to validate that, okay, that value makes sense or that color makes sense in the way I had been using it. So more to come on that, but just an idea of what's coming. And hopefully teams can be trying this out as we go so we can get feedback while we're moving forward, and if there's ideas on what else we can provide to help with migrating to this major release or information we can share as we go, please let us know. And that's it, Rachel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dana. All right. Abby's going to be covering Patternfly content enhancements, and she'll be covering some enhancements we'll be making to the homepage as well.
Thank you, Rachel. All right. Let me just share my screen here. I'm currently sharing my screen. If anyone can't see my slides, just holler out. So today I will be talking about some Patternfly content enhancements, specifically Patternfly's homepage. But before we dive into the homepage, I'd love to kind of just take a minute here to reflect on how far we've come with content. We've hit some major milestones with Medium, Twitter, GitHub documentation, and now onto the Patternfly homepage. I presented on Medium a few months ago at this community meeting, and at the time we were almost at 8 articles, And I think we were just under 20 followers. So now we are up to 19 articles with more in the works. And we recently just surpassed 70 followers. And in addition, our writers continue to come from all walks of life: engineering, research, design, development, and content strategy. But what's more important than these facts and figures is really the story that they're telling. We can definitely say with confidence that Medium is becoming that place where flyers can go to share ideas, connect with others, and ultimately just create this amazing online community of content, which has been so much fun to see develop. And speaking of developing, Medium and Twitter are actually pretty much working in tandem. Medium is pretty much our macro blog where we have longer form content pieces, whereas Twitter is our micro blog where we have little tweets, or sorry, little forms of content, which are tweets. And they're both channels, even though they're very different, they really are helping each other. By sharing articles on Twitter, we're getting more eyes in front of our articles. And then those articles are also drawing more attention to our Twitter channel. We're getting more followers, more engagement, and more people talking about Patternfly. The other day, actually, I just saw this on Twitter, which was super exciting. Somebody who was not a follower yet of Patternfly asked about design systems, and somebody recommended Patternfly over Twitter. And now she's following us. So, of course, I've reached out to her, and it's just great because people are discovering us now on Twitter. Now kind of switching gears from the marketing focused content to technical, we've been putting some energy into our README files on GitHub. Patternfly has a lot of repos on GitHub filled with amazing information, and we've been focusing on how we can deliver that information so that readers have the ultimate content experience. What we've been doing so far is focusing on the React repo and we recently finished up conducting a lot of research and competitive analyses to come up with this new content structure that was recently applied to the React repo's main README file, which is super exciting. There's also an article about it on our Medium publication. For those of you who weren't at the last meeting, I shared this slide at the last meeting, but to give everybody just a brief of how this structure looks, it kicks off with a title and description, then the community section so that people can connect with us, table of contents to make navigating easy, links to other README files in the repo, setup, contribution guidelines, and then we wrap up with license. So with all that said, now we can dive a little bit deeper into the Patternfly homepage. Here's the what, why, and how of the homepage. What is it? Well, it is the main page that you see when you visit patternfly.org, and its sole purpose, or its main purpose, is to introduce people to Patternfly. If you look at the homepage, the content itself is pretty well done. It's accurate, it's well written, so it really begs the question why. Why are we pouring energy and resources into revamping this content? For the short answer, we really want this content to reflect Patternfly's brand identity, and we want to connect with people on that logical and also emotional level and effectively communicate what Patternfly is, what it's all about, and why they should join this community, or if they're already members of the community, why they should be proud to call themselves flyers. How will this process look? Well, we're about halfway through the process now. Patternfly's voice traits were nailed down a few months ago. I took a first stab at rewriting the homepage copy, and that is currently going through the first round of reviewals from some community members. And then once all feedback is in and applied, it'll most likely go through one more round of reviewal before launching. I've said this a few times, but content is so much better when it's collaborative, so it's really important that we get at least 1 or 2 rounds of reviewal so that people have a chance to share their feedback and perspectives to really make our homepage shine. To give everybody some insight into what we're looking at when we revamp this content, we're really paying close attention to style, voice, and tone. For style, we want to focus on being conversational and being human and having a very heavy emphasis on accessibility and comprehension. So we'll be using short sentences, plain language, and familiar words. Then for voice, our voice will align with Patternfly's voice traits. That is Patternfly's personality and identity. Warm, welcoming, engaging, and innovative. Patternfly is a community of people, so it's very important that when people arrive on our homepage, they feel like they're being welcomed into a community of warm and friendly people. Also engaging. We want to make sure that we're not just giving people information, but we're delivering it in a way that is interesting because we don't want to put anyone to sleep. And then for innovative, Patternfly is a very innovative community where we never settle. We always challenge the status quo. And I want to make sure that we're instilling that confidence in anybody who visits our website. Everybody can kind of look to us as this community where they can share their ideas and be who they are without, no matter how crazy their input might sound. Everybody's kind of welcome to contribute. Then for tone, we want to be very informative and deliver things in a direct and straightforward way, but we also want to make sure that we're casual. We don't want to be formal or rigid or cold. We can still come off as polished and professional while also making sure that we sound like humans who are just simply talking to community members through a website page. So that is all I have for today. Thank you so much for listening, and definitely stay tuned. Once that homepage copy is live, everybody will most likely be informed because it's something I'm really excited about. All right, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abby. All right. Next, Gina is going to be covering some enhancements that we're making to the Patternfly website and talk a little bit about our process. It was a very involved design effort that required a lot of work and persistence. And now we've come to this place where we can provide really strong recommendations on colors and icons from the Patternfly 5 perspective. So Gina's going to get into that.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So, first, I'm just going to talk about our current colors and icons pages and why we chose to redesign them or why there's problems with them currently. For the colors page, and I linked the page links to the headings here if you want to check them out. But both of them live in the design guidelines styles sections, and the colors page doesn't display our full color palette. It does display groups of colors and kind of puts them into context of our components, but it is definitely missing some important groups of colors like backgrounds and icon colors. And it doesn't do a great job of connecting the colors to the components, even though we have some examples, but they're not really great. And then it has little information about how the global color variables are used within the whole variable system. And for the icons page, it's actually really not an accurate representation of the Patternfly icon set that we recommend using. It's missing all the Font Awesome icons that we use, and it especially is confusing for designers who are using the Sketch design kit because it doesn't match what's offered in there. And then there's no guidance on icon sizes or colors, and there's really no usage guidance on where you would use those icons. So that's kind of the background of how this stuff started. And for the colors page, I'm going to go over this real quick, and then I'm going to just take you through the Marvel project that I made with the wireframes. But for the colors page, now that we've redesigned it, I went through all the global variables in Patternfly, and I did this whole spreadsheet of how they map to, if it's a color, how it would go from the hex value to the palette color, so like blue 300, to then the global variable, and then what components that's used in. So I use a lot of that to create what you're going to see here. But you're going to gain from this page the groupings of colors based on variables. So that would be typography variables or iconography variables. That's an example of it. And then how those are used within components. So you can see a little bit of a snippet there. And then you'll also see for each color swatch specifics for that swatch, including the variable name, the hex value, and then information about where that color is used within our system. And finally, you can see the whole color palette, which I included a little snapshot of it here. For And for each of the colors, it will say the palette color name, which is what I was saying was like the blue 300 thing, the hex value, and then in each one, you'll have all of the variables associated with that color because some colors have more than one CSS variable. So now that I said that, I'm going to walk you through this. This is also linked in the slide. But for the colors page, we have sections, like I was saying, that are grouped. So we have our primary colors, typography and iconography, backgrounds, status and state colors. And here, one thing to note that we kind of just added was some direction on where these colors are applied in alerts, because that's often something that comes up that's confusing. So we added some information there. Shadows are provided as well. Same contrast ratio information that we have on the site now that's about accessibility. And then finally, this is the color palette section. If you come to this section, nothing would be expanded out in the tables. They would just all be collapsed. But just for the time being, I wanted to show how that would look. So that's what that is. And for interaction portion, when I was saying that you could click on a color swatch, you can hover over one, click on it, and it brings up this tooltip that shows you the variable, hex value, and usage. So then if you were to hover over this link, it would, and you click on it, it brings you right down to that color within the color palette. And that row will be expanded so you can see all the variables. So that is that. And then for the icons page, we have some new stuff too that you can gain. So the icon sizes, which you'll see here with corresponding variables and usage guidelines for those sizes. And then we have the icon colors, which we actually will just link you back to the colors page instead of repeating that and possibly making that confusing. And then we'll have the ability to download the whole icon library that Patternfly recommends as SVGs, as well as just the Patternfly icon font. And you'll still be able to get HTML and React code snippets for an individual icon. And you can download a single Patternfly icon, which you're able to do now as well. And then finally, we'll have a table, a massive table that will list the icons, icon names, styles, which would be like Font Awesome or Patternfly. The type, so if it's an action icon, if it's in a framework icon, status, etc. And then the React names and contextual usage. I had to add React names in here because they use different icon names than Core does. So I will walk through that Marvel project real quick. So this is just a closer look at those screenshots that I added, but you can see all the icons in usage, so it's pretty cool. And then this is still a work in progress, so that's why I have this little note to myself there. And then this is an example of the table. And another important thing to note here is that we can search through the icons, and this search will actually allow you to hopefully search through all of the information. So we'll filter down the table based on what you search, rather than just allowing you to search by one attribute. And that's all.
Hey, Gina,
Anybody
this
have
is
any
Brian.
questions?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just wanted to point out that we'll also have another table below this one that we're going to show the updated recommendations. So over time, some of these icons have changed. So they were originally maybe a Patternfly icon or an IcoMoon icon. None of the icons that we've referred to now or in the past are being removed from anywhere. They'll still be available for folks to use, but our recommendations have changed. So we'll have a second table under this one, or a separate section under this one that will show how those different icons have been updated from older ones to newer ones. So if you happen to be using one of these older icons, you can see what the newer icon recommendation is. So if you wanted to upgrade or migrate to that icon, you have the ability to do so, or you could keep using the one that you're still using. We're not ripping anything out so that it breaks anything for anyone.
Yeah. And that's something Brian has done like an enormous amount of work on this, and thankfully his spreadsheet has allowed me to create this, but that's something that we're working on updating the design with now. Stop sharing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian, Gina, and team. All right. And we're going to move on to reducing white space and drop shadows across the PF library. This is an effort that Lucy has been working on, so she's going to present her work here.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see this?
We can.
Cool. So as part of the major release, we wanted to rethink some of our visual styling across the Patternfly library, and two of the areas we wanted to focus on were just seeing where we can reduce white space and drop shadows across components. So why specifically for white space? We just started off designing with too much white space, and this was initially because we wanted to align with Red Hat brand of using ample white space to symbolize open nature of our culture and products. But while this may work for marketing, it doesn't really translate well to product context, and it ends up wasting space that could have been used for greater information density. And so we just really wanted to make sure that we're using that negative white space in a way that allows content to have a clearer hierarchy and better readability, and to avoid using it just for the sake of using it. And then for drop shadows, I think we tended to over-rely on drop shadows throughout our components, and that causes things to feel a little bit messy and outdated. And it also can lead to confusing hierarchy of page content and components. And then also, this was a good chance to clear up some inconsistencies between the values that were existing in the sketch library and in core right now. And then just trying to make sure that drop shadows are really only being used to put emphasis on an object and or to show the elevation or hierarchy of components on a page. So what's changing? And Michael Coker and Matt Carano, if I got this wrong, you can correct me. But for white space, we're editing down the white space across components. Components with tighter spacing will become the new standard for product use. And then some components will retain two spacing variations, one with the tighter spacing, one with larger spacing, and the one with more spacing will now be an opt-in. So we're not taking away the variations, like specifically with like data table or data list. Like there will still be a version with more room if you need it, but our recommendation is to go for the tighter spacing now. And then with drop shadows, updated the values of the current shadows, also introduced a new extra large drop shadow from Modal and Wizard. This just was needed because there's just a huge jump right now from small and medium drop shadow to our current large value. So just making that transition a little bit more gradual. And then also going through the components and replacing the drop shadow treatment with border lines when that change in elevation is not necessary. So like an example of that is components that expand in line with content. We use drop shadow a lot to show that expansion, but really it can exist on the same layer, same elevation as its parent toggle. So like drawers, copy to clipboard, or expandable data list and table rows. And I know there are a lot of changes, and I link both of those Marvel prototypes in here, but for now, I just wanted to show an example of a mock-up with both of these changes updated. So this is a master detail layout as it would exist today. And as you can see here, this is with our standard data table and drawer with that shadow. It's just, there isn't that much room for content because of all the white space that's there. You can only fit 5 lines, 5 rows of content into that data table. And then also this drop shadow, it makes it seem like it's covering part of that data table. so it almost makes you uncertain that there's information that you're not getting here. But in reality, it's expanding in line with that data table content. So it's just, there's nothing behind it. It's just not super necessary. So when we apply the reduction in spacing and drop shadows, you can see we can fit a lot more content on the page. And then also this details drawer is now existing on the same level as the rest of the content on the page, which just makes the hierarchy a little bit more clear. It's not more important than the master items themselves. And then it also just lets there be a bit more emphasis on the selected row here. So that hierarchy is a lot more clear. And then again, like this is how it exists today, but this is an example of showing, especially when you start getting into a page and interacting with things, and there can be a lot of elements that add more drop shadows, and it just gets a lot busier, and the hierarchy can get completely thrown off here, especially now you have 4 different drop shadows existing on one page, and it's just really hard to know what you're supposed to be looking at or what is the most important information. So when you apply the drop shadow reduction, you can see that it's just, you don't lose context. The content is still super visible. It's not covering as much, and you can really focus on the items that are more important. So now you can definitely see there's nothing really competing as much with these toast alerts. And then that popover title is more of a secondary layer and not demanding as much attention when it has all that white space and a larger drop shadow. And then I can walk you through the Marvel prototypes, but so for white space, I just have a list of all the changes, and then also mock-ups and specs to illustrate that if you'd rather see that visually. And then for drop shadows, same deal, the new styles, values, and then the component updates, and then walking you through kind of how I got there, and then giving more of a visual view of those new updates. And those are both linked in the presentation. And that's all I have.
Great, thanks, Lucia. All right. And I should be sharing my screen. Okay, so now I'm going to cover what we're going to be working on next. We have a few things in progress. We'll be working on the card view, which is wrapping up now and will be available in the future, and the table column management demo, and enhancements to drawer and data list. And we have so many other enhancements in progress as part of our major release, and I want to show you what that looks like in our current milestone. So while I just covered a few enhancements that will be part of this particular upcoming release for this spring, for our major release later this spring, we have many updates that are going to become available, and we're working on those here. So I really encourage you to take a look at these that will be available later this spring, as well as the components that I just mentioned that will be available very soon. So that covers it for what is coming up, and I'm really looking forward to implementing a lot of these changes that we presented today. And are there any questions for any of our presenters about things that we covered? All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We are available for any questions that may come up on Slack, and we'd love to chat with you. And I'll be posting this video on YouTube if you'd like to share it out with anyone. I'll be sending that link to our mailing list. I really appreciate you joining us today. We'll reconvene again at the end of April, same time at the end of April. So I will talk with you then, if not before. Have a great day.